The wind cut through my jacket as I waited at the trailhead. Montana's Beartooth Mountains loomed ahead, their peaks already dusted with the first snow of the season. Late October was always a gamble for the last guided hunt of the year, but the substantial fee the Petersons were paying would carry me through the lean winter months. I spotted their SUV crawling up the gravel access road right on time. That was my first surprise. Clients rarely showed up when they were supposed to, especially wealthy ones. The vehicle came to a stop and 3 men stepped out together almost perfectly in step. "Mr. Peterson?" I called out, extending my hand to the oldest of the 3. "Alexander Bowman. Call me Alex." Daniel Peterson took my hand. His grip was firm but brief. His skin felt oddly cool even though he'd just stepped out of a warm car interior. "These are my sons, Thomas and Samuel," he said, his voice flat and remarkably calm. Both sons nodded but didn't speak or offer their hands. All 3 wore expensive hunting gear that looked brand new. No signs of wear, no weathering, like it just came from the box. "Well," I said, filling the awkward silence, "we've got about 5 miles of hiking to reach our campsite. The basin up there is prime elk country." As I helped them organize their packs, the weird quiet between them really struck me. Most families I guide never shut up, joking around, telling stories, at least talking about the hunt. The Petersons barely made a sound, even to each other. We started along the trail, a narrow path winding through lodgepole pines. I pointed out fresh elk droppings, explaining how to tell how old they were and what they meant. The Petersons stared blankly at the ground. Samuel stopped now and then to touch the soil, dragging his fingers through it with an intense look. "See here where they've been eating?" I said, pointing out some stripped bark on a young aspen. Thomas stopped dead. His eyes locked onto the damaged tree. He reached out, tracing the teeth marks with his fingers, then put his fingers to his nose. "Everything okay?" I asked. "It's fine," he replied, but his eyes stayed glued to the tree, a strange kind of hunger twisting his expression. By mid-afternoon, we reached the small clearing I'd picked for our camp. A creek burbled nearby, giving us fresh water and helping hide our smell from the elk. While they put up their tents, I noticed all 3 Petersons would sometimes stop and sniff the air. Not like hunters trying to catch an elk scent, though, more like creatures searching for something deeper. I wrote it off as city people trying too hard to feel the wilderness. I'd seen weirder things in 15 years of guiding. That evening I cooked steaks over the fire, a tradition for the first night. The meat sizzled and the smell filled the camp. My mouth watered, but the Petersons watched the steaks with detached curiosity. They didn't look hungry at all. When I handed out plates, Daniel took one small bite and set his aside. Thomas and Samuel barely touched theirs. "Something wrong with the food?" I asked, trying to keep the annoyance out of my voice. "These were good steaks, and my camp cooking was solid." Thomas looked confused at his plate. "It tastes like ash," he said softly. Daniel shot him a sharp look. "We're just tired from the hike, Alex, not used to the altitude." I nodded, though the camp was only at 7,000 feet, not high enough to spoil an appetite. As I finished my meal by myself, I watched them from the corner of my eye. All 3 stared straight out into the deepening darkness with a terrifying intensity. It sent a chill through me despite the fire's warmth. Something wasn't right about the Petersons, but they were paying clients and tomorrow we'd be hunting elk, the whole reason they were here. Whatever quirks they had, I could handle them for 5 days. After all, I was the professional. This was my wilderness and I knew how to handle anything in it. I just wish I'd been right about that. Dawn broke with a quiet indifference. I'd slept poorly, the Petersons' strange behavior playing on a loop in my mind. The forest outside seemed unusually still as I stoked the morning fire. No bird song, just the occasional whisper of wind through pine needles. "Rise and shine, gentlemen," I called, keeping my voice upbeat and professional. "Perfect morning for tracking. Coffee's brewing." The Petersons emerged from their tents at the same time, like they'd rehearsed it. Their faces were slack, expressionless, yet their eyes flitted around the campsite with unusual sharpness. Thomas kept licking his lips, a nervous tic that hadn't been there yesterday. "We'll head northeast," I explained over coffee. "Found fresh elk sign near the ridge. If we stay quiet and the wind stays right, we should get a shot before noon." I pointed towards the faint tracks. Daniel nodded absently, not meeting my eyes. Samuel stared into his untouched coffee mug while Thomas kept glancing toward the tree line. None of them had touched the oatmeal I'd prepared. "Any questions about the plan?" I asked, the silence making me increasingly uneasy. "The mountain," Samuel finally said, his voice rough and unused. "It smells different today." Daniel shot his son a sharp look. "We're just excited to get started, Alexander." After about an hour on the trail, my excitement had turned sour. The Petersons showed zero interest in the fresh clues I kept finding. Every time I pointed out solid sign, a tree rubbed by antlers, fresh droppings, clear hoof prints pressed into the soft ground, they'd just nod without really looking and stare off elsewhere. "Take a look here," I said, kneeling beside a lush section of muddy ground. "Bull elk, huge one. He came through way less than an hour ago." I touched the soil. "Feel it? Still holding body heat." Instead of showing interest, Thomas wandered off towards some nearby aspen trees. Samuel squatted down, scanning the forest floor like he was looking for something specific. Daniel kept checking his watch. "Gentlemen," I finally said, annoyance edging into my voice, "if elk hunting isn't what you're here for, what exactly did you pay me to guide you on?" Daniel offered a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "We just need to acclimate. Maybe we should head back to camp for an early lunch." Back at camp, I started making sandwiches while they huddled together at the clearing's edge, whispering too low for me to hear. When I called them over to eat, they just said they weren't hungry. "I need to check on something," Daniel announced suddenly. "Boys, with me." They slipped into the trees before I could say a word. I waited 15 minutes, then 30. A heavy feeling of wrongness settled over me. Part of me wanted to be relieved for a break from their strangeness, but instead cold unease crawled up my spine. I followed their trail. It wasn't hard. They'd made no effort to hide where they went. About a quarter of a mile from camp, I heard it. A rhythmic, rasping sound, punctuated by something like loud chewing. The trail opened into a small clearing. I stopped dead at the edge, frozen. The Petersons were kneeling in a rough circle. Daniel and Samuel scooped up big handfuls of dark, damp earth, brought it right up under their noses, and inhaled deeply. Their eyes squeezed shut like it was bliss. But it was Thomas who made my stomach twist. He had stripped a chunk of bark off a fallen aspen trunk and was gnawing on it methodically. A thin scarlet trickle of blood ran from his gums down his chin, yet his expression showed nothing but awkwardly ecstatic satisfaction. "What the hell are you doing?" My voice came out tight and choked. They snapped around, startled. Thomas dropped the bark, but not before I saw the jagged teeth marks sunk deep into it, the splinters stuck in his bleeding lips. Daniel stood up slowly, brushing dirt off his hands with a fake casualness. "Alexander, just getting back to nature?" His smile was a ghastly grimace. "Thomas has a toothache," old wilderness remedy, using the bark to numb the pain. It was such an obvious lie I almost snorted. Samuel was still on his knees, his fingers buried in the dirt, looking up at me with a mix of raw hunger and guilt. "We should head back to camp," Daniel said, his voice eerily calm. "Still plenty of hunting time left in the day." As they walked past me in single file, I caught the metallic tang of blood mixed with deep earth and freshly ripped wood. My hands shook ever so slightly as I followed them back. These weren't just eccentric clients. They weren't acting like sane people at all. We were miles from any road, from any help. And with sudden bone-deep clarity, I understood that my expertise, my deep knowledge of these mountains, meant less than nothing now. Because whatever was happening to the Petersons wasn't something any hunting guide manual covered. I didn't sleep that night. Every rustle outside my tent, every whisper of wind through the pines sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. The image of Thomas, his gums bleeding as he tore at that aspen bark, kept replaying in my mind. By dawn, my eyes burned and my thoughts had hardened into a single urgent command. This trip was over, now. When the Petersons crawled out of their tent, I saw dark smudges beneath their fingernails. Soil. Their eyes were way too bright for early morning, skin pale but flushed across the cheekbones. I pretended not to see how Samuel's tongue kept darting out to lick a brownish stain at the corner of his mouth. "Gentlemen," I announced, packing my gear with calm efficiency. Compartment pack, shelter, all of it. I checked the satellite uplink. There's a major storm closing in faster than predicted. The lie felt cold and solid in my mouth. "We need to break camp and get out of here immediately." I braced myself for arguments, protests about the money paid, the missed hunt. But Daniel just nodded. His face was blank, accepting. "Of course, Alexander, safety first." That calm agreement scared me more than shouting would have. Samuel and Thomas swapped a look, something silent passing between them, before they started silently taking down their tent. As Thomas folded the rainfly, I saw him press a folded section to his face, inhaling deeply, eyes fluttering shut like he'd never smelled anything so good. We were packed and moving within 30 minutes. I pushed a hard pace, aiming to cover as much ground as we could before darkness caught us. If we really pushed, maybe we could hit the trailhead by the next afternoon. Maybe I could get to my truck, call for help, find some goddamn explanation for what had twisted these men. The forest felt different now. The huge beauty of the mountains, the thing that usually filled me with respect, felt heavy, crushing. The huge pines weren't shelter anymore. They leaned. The silence wasn't peaceful. It felt like being watched. Even the crisp autumn air, which should have been sharp and clean in my lungs, tasted stale and used, like the mountain was taking my breath back. I kept the Petersons in front of me on the trail. No way were they walking behind. They moved with a creepy unity, their footsteps barely a sound on the pine needles. Every so often, one would stop to rub a hand along a tree trunk or crouch to look at something on the ground. Each time, I snapped at them to move. "We need to keep moving, keep the pace," my voice getting tighter by the hour. They'd just give those empty smiles and walk on. The shadows stretched out far too fast. No matter how hard I pushed, we couldn't make the trailhead by dark. One more night camp. "We stop here," I called, pointing to a small clearing. My mouth was bone dry, my back knotted from hours of tension. "First light, we roll." Daniel smiled without it touching his eyes. "Whatever you think is best, Alexander." I skipped a cooking fire, only starting a small one for light. I handed out energy bars, saying we needed to conserve supplies. Truth was, the thought of cooking for them, watching them stare at canned food with that dead look, made me sick. As full darkness swallowed the clearing, I retreated to my tent, but left it open. I lay dead still, listening to my own heart hammering, watching through the flap as the three men sat like statues around the dying fire embers. Unnervingly still, no shifting, no chatter, barely blinking. 1 hour passed, then another. When the fire shrank to ghostly orange coals, they moved. In perfect silence, they stood up and drifted to the edge of camp. Even in the deep gloom, I saw them kneel on the forest floor. Soft sounds reached me. Fingernails scratching at soil, twigs snapping, wet sounds of chewing. The noises they made, wet, hungry, almost like praying, turned my stomach, but I couldn't look away. My hand found the grip of my hunting knife. Time to face this. "What the hell is happening to you?" My voice shook, betraying me. They turned together. Their faces were pale ghosts in the thin moonlight through the trees. Daniel's lips were smeared with dark dirt, a twig sticking sideways from his mouth like some ugly cigar stub. Thomas's teeth looked black. Samuel's chin glistened with tree sap. "We've been trying to satisfy it," Daniel said. His voice was terrifyingly level. "First the soil, then the wood, then the leaves." He pulled the twig from his mouth, studying it like it let him down. "But the mountain, it's still hungry." He looked straight at me. In the dim light, his eyes seemed to drink the light. Bottomless pits in his sunken face. "It wants something with a beating heart." The words hung in the freezing air between us, and I understood with perfect, icy clarity. I wasn't their guide anymore. I was their offering. I was frozen in place, my breath puffing small clouds in the night air. Daniel's dirt-smeared smile gleamed in the dying firelight. Thomas and Samuel stood like sentries beside him, their eyes reflecting an orange glow that didn't come from our campfire. "We should rest," I said, forcing my voice steady. "Tomorrow I'll take you somewhere special, somewhere the mountain might find satisfaction." The lie felt sour in my mouth, but Daniel nodded slowly, like he was weighing a business offer, not my life. "Yes," he finally said. "The mountain can wait until morning." I retreated to my tent, my thoughts racing. 15 years of guiding experience, and nothing had readied me for this. I lay still, listening to their movements outside. They didn't sleep. Occasionally one shifted position, but mostly they stayed perfectly still, like stone guards on duty. Once I heard Thomas whisper something that sounded like, "It's getting stronger." I pretended to sleep for hours, through the deepest part of the night, maybe an hour before the false dawn. My fingers closed around my rifle and the emergency pack I'd secretly prepared earlier while pretending to rearrange gear: water, compass, knife, fire starter. The essentials. Carefully, I slit through the back of my tent with my hunting knife. The canvas parted with only a soft, whispering sound. I froze, listening. Nothing. The icy night air stung my face as I slipped out. 20 yards. That's all I needed to reach the trees. I'd navigated these mountains in total darkness before. The Petersons, those rich city men with brand new boots, wouldn't have a chance tracking me. Or so I thought. I made it maybe 30 yards before Samuel's voice sliced through the dark. "He's running." No shouts, no panic, just that flat statement like they saw this coming all along. I gave up on stealth and ran. Crashing through underbrush, my headlamp beam jumped wildly ahead of me. Behind me, I heard them move with coordinated silence that turned my blood cold. No stumbling, no yelling back and forth. Just the steady rhythm of 3 pairs of boots hitting the ground perfectly together. The forest, my sanctuary for decades, suddenly felt wrong. Branches grabbed at my jacket. Roots seemed to reach up to trip me. A path I knew had been here yesterday was just gone, replaced by a solid wall of dark pines. When daylight finally broke, I'd been running for hours, my lungs burning like fire. I stopped on a ridge, scanning my back trail. Nothing, just an ocean of ghostly fog below, covering the valley pines. Maybe I'd lost them. Then I saw them. 3 shapes moving steadily through the mist in a neat search line. A pattern no weekend hunter should know. They weren't rushing. They didn't need to. I crouched low and headed east, toward the old fire lookout tower. If I could reach it by mid-morning, I could lock myself in, maybe use the emergency radio I knew was stored there to call for help. By noon, my hope was fading as fast as my strength. Twice I'd changed direction, using every trick to ditch a tail. Creek beds, rocky climbs, winding back on my path. Nothing worked. They always changed course, always closed the gap. When I finally stopped at a small stream to fill my water bottle, I saw how they looked at me through my binoculars. Different. Their eyes were no longer watching a guide. They studied me like prey. Their stares lingered on my throat, my wrists, places where blood runs closest to the skin. Once, when Daniel thought I couldn't see him, he pressed his palm flat against a huge pine trunk and leaned his forehead on the bark, like he was listening hard. Minutes later, they adjusted course again, cutting off the route I planned to take. By late afternoon, I was at the bottom of the ridge where the old lookout stood. My muscles screamed, but a tiny spark of hope flickered. Just 800 brutal feet straight up to safety. I was halfway there when Samuel's voice floated up from below, weirdly clear despite the distance. "Alex," he called, not yelling, but the sound struck me sharp as a bell. "You know these woods better than anyone, but the mountain knows them better than you." I looked down. All 3 just stood at the base of the ridge. They hadn't even started climbing. Instead, Daniel placed his hand on a boulder, then looked straight up at me with a smile that froze my heart. "The mountain's been here long before you," he said, "and it's very, very hungry." And as if it hurt him, the ground under my feet began to shake. The earth rattled beneath me, nearly throwing me off balance. Small pebbles skittered down the slope, the vibration traveling up through my legs into my spine. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a response. The mountain had heard Daniel's words. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran flat out along the ridge. Stealth didn't matter anymore. The shaking stopped, but something worse replaced it. The clear, horrible feeling of being watched by something huge and ancient. The forest no longer felt wild. It felt like the inside of something alive. For almost an hour, I pushed myself harder than ever before, my lungs burning as I crossed a field of loose rock and scrambled down into a narrow gully, hoping it would hide my trail. The autumn sun moved across the sky, stretching shadows into long, grasping fingers. My legs ached and screamed for rest, but fear drove me on until I finally collapsed against a big boulder covered in thick green moss, deep in a small clearing. "Lost them," I gasped, leaning back against the cool stone, letting myself breathe. That's when I felt it. A faint, low hum coming from inside the boulder itself. It was so subtle I might have missed it if I wasn't pressed right against it. It felt like a deep purr, or maybe a slow heartbeat pulsing through the rock straight into my back. I tried to push myself away, but sudden dizziness washed over me. My vision got blurry, the trees around me seeming to lean in, watching. And then came the hunger. Not my own empty stomach, but something deep and bottomless, a yawning hole that felt like it came from outside me. My eyes fixed on the thick, velvety moss all over the boulder. It looked good, tasty. The rich green suddenly seemed juicy, almost like food. Without even thinking, my fingers started scraping the surface, gathering up a patch of it. "No!" I choked out, jerking myself away from the rock. Horror twisted in my gut like a snake as I stared at the moss still clutched in my shaking hand. I had almost eaten it. "It's starting, isn't it, Alex?" Daniel's voice came from right in front of me. I hadn't heard him coming. None of them. All three Petersons stood at the edge of the clearing, their shapes sharp against the fading daylight. They weren't even breathing hard. "The mountain reaches into you," Samuel said, tilting his head like a curious animal. First with whispers, then with hunger. I scrambled to my feet, dropping the moss. I backed up until I felt the hard surface of the boulder against my spine again. The vibration got stronger, pulsing through my body. My mouth watered uncontrollably. "We were like you once," Thomas said, his voice strangely soft. "Fighting it. But there's peace in giving in, Alex." Daniel stepped forward, a thin smile on his dirt-stained lips. "You feel it now, don't you? The mountain always gets what it needs." The unnatural hunger twisted inside me again, sharper than before. My eyes darted to a patch of dark, rich soil near my feet, full of old leaves. Something deep within me wanted to kneel down, to scoop it up, to cram it into my mouth to fill the emptiness. I pressed my hands against my temples. "What's happening to me?" "You're becoming part of something ancient," Daniel whispered, moving closer. Something that was hungry long before the first human knew what hunger was. The vibration from the boulder turned into a song humming in my bones, and the mountain's vast appetite roared through me like a storm.